What you'll also see at the same time is this crazy paradox where the highest levels of consciousness start coming into play. People start awakening at a mass level. And then, right as it's beginning to put together all of the puzzle pieces here on Earth, it happens to get reset. Every 13,000 years, the Earth goes through massive cataclysmic shifts that cause a reset to civilization, almost like it was clockwork. So I'm going to be going over today exactly what those shifts look like, why they would lead to a total reset, as well as what we can expect as we evolve and we're moving into the age of Aquarius and this age is closing out. What causes the Earth and civilizations to go through a reset are geomagnetic excursions. So what are geomagnetic excursions? They're when Earth's magnetosphere, which is our protective shield that shields and repels all of the solar activity that would normally be highly cataclysmic to, or at least at the very least, highly detrimental to the Earth's atmosphere. Well, the magnetosphere shields us from that. And so geomagnetic excursions are when our magnetosphere is down. It's down to 5 to 10%, which is super low and super weak. When that happens, you could think of it as us not having that shield there. And now we're exposed to a bunch of solar activity, solar radiation, solar rays, and solar flares. And imagine them for anywhere from 1,000 to 5,000 years just bombarding Earth, to the point where that drives any civilization remaining that either was aware that these events were going to come, or they were building very elaborate and intricate underground channels, cave-like cities that we would consider today bunkers. And then even after that, we have some sort of foreknowledge, rather forewisdom, that allows some people to take precautionary measures against these geomagnetic excursions. And those precautionary measures would be building some sort of structure, whether it's an infrastructure or a spiritual infrastructure, a spiritual structure to the person's light body. Whatever it may be, it was all of the above. It was both physical structures, that's where we get many of our esoteric myths. This is the number one way that they're actually preserved, because many people don't know about geomagnetic excursions or about the 13,000 year resets. They don't know about 26,000 year, the great year. But what they do know are stories, very popular biblical stories about certain cataclysmic events. And when we connect those two, what we'll find is that how this knowledge has been most popularly preserved is through the literary device of our holy texts. In every civilization that exists today, you will find some story, some version of the same exact myth, only it's not a myth. It's literally history being preserved through the vehicle of parables being used through our history. And even though it's heavily distorted and manipulated history by the time we get it, there's still these little gems, little diamonds of truth. And then it's up to us to really shift through everything and understand what is true, what's not, and gain the discernment to understand if there's any pieces that we could put together. And when it comes to geomagnetic excursions and resets, the number one thing that we can look at is a flood story. Every civilization has a flood story. And that's because it's actually regarding this 13,000 year cycles that we experience. So how does that have to do with floods? Because back to geomagnetic excursions, when the magnetosphere's shield goes down or goes very, very low, what happens is a bunch of solar flares, a bunch of solar activity starts bombarding the terrain here on Earth. And that causes massive deluges, aka floods. So the deluges are no different from this 13,000 year cycles that we're experiencing. They're a part of the same story. It's just many things have been left out on purpose. Many things have been lost because, once again, we have civilizations that are trying their best to preserve knowledge to warn future civilizations, but much of the knowledge gets suppressed anyways, simply because the more people are aware of exactly where they are in time and exactly what repeating patterns are happening, almost like a cosmic algorithm here on the earth plane. Whatever paradigm we look at that through, what persists is the fact that there are these cycles within cycles within cycles. And so if you have that knowledge and others don't, you're able now, by suppressing that knowledge, to control them and even take completely different actions, behaviors, measures because of the knowledge that some people have, and then the disparage between that and how the majority have that same knowledge suppressed, so they don't have that. So when it comes to these 13,000 year cycles, what we can look at and point to for some of the things to look for would be any form of like massive extremes inside the climate. The magnetosphere acts as a plasma membrane that starts deep inside Earth's subterranean core, creating a barrier that acts as a firmament between Earth and interstellar conditions. Now, typically, what we are told causes a reset to happen at the spiritual level. So at the energetics level, what drives these resets to happen cyclically is that civilization has become out of balance with nature. And what that means is that civilization starts to lower its moral and spiritual integrity. It starts to disconnect from its spiritual integrity. And by doing so, it goes out of balance with nature. Because anytime that we as a civilization are meant to evolve or to be progressive and to be innovative, what happens is that has to match, that has to be in balance, that has to equally match our level of consciousness. And when we're not actually coming from higher states of consciousness, and in this case, that would be like going through spiritual awakenings, going through heart-centered consciousness, and tapping in to all of those evolutionary abilities and pathways that come from that space. What ends up happening is that society and civilization at large begins to calcify. And that means that it goes into lower and lower states of consciousness, and then you'll be able to see that. That's not even something that needs to be said. You'll be able to see the clear signs of a degrading and a de-evolving civilization. It's how people behave with one another. It's how people behave if they don't have their own compass within themselves, if they don't have their own spiritual integrity, right? Not just when other people are looking or performative, but if they don't have their own inner code for themselves. And then beyond the individual, what you'll see is at collective levels, it's when civilizations think that it's okay to be so violent and to normalize violence and to see that as powerful when that's the most weakest thing ever. And then what you have that is the real determining factor of all of those, which this is the factor that is essentially the thing that's being calibrated, that makes civilization go out of balance with nature itself. And that is when the beings themselves, they opt out of their own spiritual sovereignty, and they put all of the authority, all of the creative agency, all of the ability for power, and that even means being able to change things, everything, when they outsource that to parasitic institutions that literally run off of human suffering and human enslavement. So if a whole system is only intact, that can only be ran through war and through all forms of parasitic suffering, that is a highly unnatural system. We've been told that this is normal. We've been programmed to actually look up and revere it and look at it as heroic. And it's absolutely parasitic. And that's the number one thing that a person who goes through a spiritual awakening that's genuine, a genuine awakening realizes. It comes off like one veil. It's no big deal. There's no attachment to it. So the stronger we keep those attachments, we're kind of in a giant illusion of spiritual awakening. And we're keeping ourselves from the truth. We're bypassing the truth for whatever else that we think a spiritual awakening is in order to avoid this. However, that becomes the defining factors of us actually raising our frequency and even being a match to a new earth and to a new age. And so when it comes to resets at a spiritual level, that's the driving force that we are told. I'm just sharing what we're told. It's when the scales of nature go out of balance and human consciousness, as well as our spiritual integrity, those are the two things. Human consciousness and spiritual integrity do not continue to increase. In fact, they go the opposite direction, and you see complete devolving. Now, I'm going to challenge this paradigm that I just set up here, because for this to make sense, we would have to have known something different. And there's no time that I've seen people like totally in spiritual integrity, to be quite honest with you, that think of others that actually are making really positive conscious shifts from parasitic institutions and all of those different features. As a matter of fact, what you'll see is the complete opposite. If you're just looking, if you're just observing and you're not being told that this is the story or this is why resets are happening or any of that, if you're just examining with your own eyes what takes place, what you'll see is that usually civilizations act very unconscious, literally in every way possible. We have been told that there is this good old days, and that's the largest lie. That's a lie where you would have to actually really be functionally blind in order to be like, have that be romanticized, in order for us to have that emotion like filled with us, like, oh my God, there was a good old days. We need to make it great again. You would literally have to be functionally blind, because good old days for who? And I'm being very serious. Who was benefiting from that? It was more like what we see actually happen with the trajectory of things is that even though things fall apart massively before a reset, and there is a lot of devolving activity that you see people, you see war increasing constantly at a constant rate, and you see that level of aggression on the rise always. But what you'll also see at the same time is this crazy paradox where the highest levels of consciousness start coming into play. People start awakening at a mass level. And so what you'll end up noticing is that it goes from slavery, actually, into more spiritual sovereignty, and not the opposite way around. I don't perceive things as going from, wow, people were so free, they were so aligned with nature, they were so in their spiritual integrity, and then we devolved, and then society collapsed because we devolved. I wish it were that simple. Instead, I see, wow, people were really enslaved. We kind of normalized slavery on every level possible. In every context possible, humans thought it was okay to enslave one another and to extort and exploit one another. And what you'll see is that then that kind of starts coming into the light of our collective awareness. And as those shadows start becoming exposed through the light of our collective awareness, then that's when not only does those karmic reflections start to be burning out, but also that's when things start going into like a higher state of consciousness, because we're now calling out. We're now able to identify better the real distortions, the real issues. We're now able to have discourse about those. And one of the major ways that people evolve is through having those open discourses, provided they're not bots. If we look at the stages of consciousness, what we'll always find is that the lower stages of consciousness are very much egocentric, and then you'll see they go to tribalism, so they're group-centric, and that's based off of survival. And then with each higher tier of consciousness, you'll find that it goes and expands its body, mind, spirit awareness. So it will, with every tier that it goes up, it will continue to expand and continue to expand. And then it will go into cosmic centric. So it's no longer in egocentric, and then it's no longer in hive mind centric. It's no longer in tribal centric. Now it's in cosmic centric. That's what we call universal consciousness. And then you'll see that it just goes into oneness, because that's how expanded that state goes. So that doesn't happen in reverse. It's not like people start off like that and then all of a sudden they're devolving and devolving. Based off of sheer observation, it's reversed. It's actually that people are very egocentric and tribalistic. And then the more that they progress and evolve, the more that they continue to expand their consciousness, they go into spiritual sovereignty. And then they get into oneness, where there's the paradox, where they're not like some rebel without a cause individual that's sovereign for no reason. They're fully sovereign. And from that level of spiritual integrity, they understand that they are all. So they take the all in themselves as one, and they are in oneness consciousness, or what we would consider God consciousness. We could even argue that, we started off in egocentric consciousness, only worried about the self because we came from a cataclysmic event. So where do you expect us to start? Of course, we're going to start from the lowest level of consciousness, which is going to help build that drive for survival. Because of epigenetics, we know that memories get passed down. And so the number one thing that you're worried about, if you're experiencing something like that and you're one of the earliest civilizations to form after that, is going to be the driving force of egocentric tribalism and survival. So that makes absolute sense. That's totally fair. So we could look at this one of two ways. We could look at this the forward way, or we could look at it backwards. If we look at this the forward way, what we're seeing is that society started off in a much more exalted state, started off with a lot of spiritual integrity. And over time, it became all of the 7 deadly sins started to become stronger and stronger within the collective mind. So you'll see that the civilization had a peak. It had like a golden age, and then naturally it had a dark age that follows where it falls. And when it falls, it lowers its consciousness. Therefore, it goes out of balance with nature, which is natural law, and starts to devolve. And when it goes to such a low point in its own consciousness that now it has summoned, it has collectively attracted strong cataclysmic forces like comets, all sorts of types of solar activity to come and cleanse the land of itself, to come wipe it out and start over. So in that case, in this way that we're looking at it, humanity starts off in a state that's connected to God, and then starts to become starts to go through disconnection, and then even starts to become evil or wicked or disobedient, and then starts to do things, create things, take actions that are based off of violence, separation, domination, control, enslavement, all of those different things, to the point where now cataclysmic events come to cleanse the world of civilizations that are that evil. Or we could look at it this other way that I'm proposing, which is humanity starts off in a very egocentric tribalism, survivalism states, and stage by stage of its own evolution, it's given the opportunity to continue to expand its consciousness. It's given the opportunity. That doesn't mean that everyone does so, or that everyone does so at the same time. Rather, you'll see it happens in waves. And so then it gets to a point of development where it advances itself into God consciousness, into cosmic centricness and universal consciousness. All of these higher level consciousness states. And then it happens to get reset, right as it's beginning to put together all of the puzzle pieces here on Earth as to where we are, why we're here, and what's exactly going on here. And then it just so happens, how beautiful, and then it gets reset then. Now, to be fair, even though I'm proposing this, that does not mean that there is not the majority of things taking place that look very separate consciousness, look violent, look hostile. So of course that's happening. Things are happening at the same time. What you'll see is that even the more that people go through a mass spiritual awakening and start taking conscious actions and start developing spiritual congruency, meaning as within, so without, they start walking their talk, they start doing the inner work, and they start evolving genuinely, you'll also see deterioration in other collectives and other pockets. So that's taking place, and that's not meant to be overlooked. But you'll still find that the larger collective that go through a mass awakening are in a more in spiritual integrity than some like make-believe, like earlier stage of 100 years or 200 years. I want you guys to think back to like even like 600 years from now. How enlightened were they? How did they treat women? If you think back, it wasn't like it came in this like linear chronological trajectory where there were no wars, there was no pillaging, there was no conquering. Of course there was. So we have a little bit more complex of a picture when we look at it this way. But at the same time, whatever we were told only sounds simple because it's been deeply programmed into us. So if we step back and start looking at things in different ways, we might start to be able to put together all these different puzzle pieces that didn't look like they fit, but now they can start to creatively come together and fit perfectly if we just allow ourselves to step out of these very large and ancient narratives, this very large and ancient programming about things because they're simple to understand, because they sound very basic and universally true. Doesn't it sound universally true to say that, well, we tipped the scales and went out of balance? I think that that sounds very universally true, but I think the truth can be simple, but that at the moment it's complex because it doesn't sound as simple as what I just said. To drive this point home about complexity, nuance, and simplicity, imagine that some civilizations really did cause their own cataclysm because they were highly destructive, highly super narcissistic and service to self. So imagine that some civilizations had reached their peak and then used whatever technology that they had created or used whatever type of power that they had to abuse it. Because abuse of power is a repeated theme inside this experience here. So it does make sense at the same time to see how there's abuse of power and that creates like a snake eating its own tail. That comes back and destroys the very source that put out those actions, that sent out those deeds. While at the same time that the prepackaged concepts of resets themselves can come from the very sources of service to self and the very sources of narcissistic control systems that are meant to make us forget and then blame us. I hope this has helped you reset your mind. Make sure to subscribe to my channel for higher dimensional guidance through spiritual awakening. See you next time.